Okay, so yesterday we tried to create one Maven project and we were successful. Definitely we created a Maven project. And let's close this. You can always close your project in Eclipse. Okay guys, so what you have to do, just select those projects which you don't want to use, right click and this option close. It simply just close them. So they won't irritate and you cannot open them unless you actually needed them. Okay, so right now I just have one and even I don't need the server right now, so I can close it. Server is not a project, it's a folder which is used by web applications. So if you need a web application, make sure this is also opened. But for now, we don't need even server for Hibernate because it's an standalone application. We are not using any other uh, supporting framework or library to run Hibernate. We are just using Maven to manage the project, and we just converted that project into Hibernate by adding certain libraries. I got some question in channel as well that how to identify which version. So guys, it's not you can do it on first day or second day of your development. Maybe on not in your years, 2 or 3 years. It's not even sufficient to how to figure out which version is compatible. So because I did multiple hit and tries, yes, that's true. I cannot just say okay, you have to use Java 17 and use this specific version. Otherwise I can give any version, any random version. Okay, just use Hibernate. I won't say you have to use Hibernate 5.3.7 final version. So it is because I have done multiple hit and tries to make sure that this Hibernate version is compatible with Java 17. That's why I was very precise, very concerned about that you should use the specific version what I am telling you to install. Don't just download any random stuff. You will face issue even building your project, even executing your project. Forget about you can run and get some output. You cannot even build your project. Okay, so when we give the version, so these came by hit and try. I tried multiple version, got the exceptions on my Eclipse console. Then I searched them, Google them, visited multiple official website of Hibernate to make sure that which version is compatible with Java 17. Because once Java 17 is there, so I have to learn Spring Core as well, Spring Boot as well. So those libraries will also impact the JDK version. So I pick this version and accordingly I change the Hibernate version, Spring Boot version. We will also pick Spring Boot so that we have to make sure that everything is compatible. So, likewise, these versions as well. I haven't picked them randomly. It is done and figured out by me with multiple tries. So every version will give you error because it will say that library or that file is not missing or file is not there. It's missing there. So again, I figured out that which version is compatible because these two libraries, Jakarta XML and Glassfish JAXV, these two libraries are important to parse, to scan the XML files. Why we need XML files? Because somewhere in our configuration, we have used one XML file. So that means somewhere the code is written which will read these XML files and understand it accordingly, and then accordingly it will prepare the server and execute it. So we need a parser, XML parser, and I gave a homework that check out what is XML, how to work with XML, how text looks like. So which is really important. I think I have done that in JSP servlet classes. So yeah, but make sure that you knows what is XML, extensible markup language. Fine. So that's why these versions are mentioned here. So it is definitely a confusing state if someone asks you and okay, and they will give you a screen, a laptop and an internet. Okay, and they will say okay, you have to create a Hibernate application. So you will be comfortable, you will get confused with which version I have to pick. So be specific when you are picking the version of Hibernate. Okay, this is done. I just gave you overview how to pick the version. So it's not hard and fast rule. There's no, it's not, you cannot even find document which says okay, if you're using Java 17 so use this version. No. So you have to figure out by yourself by multiple hit and tries. Okay, so let's go back to that thing what we did yesterday. So we started with Maven project. We also, okay, here I mentioned. I thought in the previous class. So yeah, XML is there. So Maven project we understood why we are using it. We also understood that. Then we all understood how Maven project structured its project. So these are the folders or directories which we are supposed to use or understand where to put what. That's always a critical thing. You cannot just put anything randomly. Everything has a space, and these are things which is understood by the this POM file. So POM knows everything where the things are. And plus Maven is there, so Maven runs some command and it will execute. and process files according to the directory structure. Then we understood like why we are using Hibernate. So idea was if we are creating any web project, uh, let be any project, not even web project, any project. So the project at certain point needs some database, and if we are talking about database, so we have to give what do you call that information about what kind of tables we are going to use. So first approach is, and the best approach is, ready with your table first. So you should provide tables first and then start working. So you have to, so you can say table would be your base. So by taking into that consideration, what Hibernate guys did, they said, okay, we will create a framework which will help us to create or maintain tables easily. Think about someone from non Java background, I would say, not Java, or make say, let's say that developer is here, but he doesn't knows, or he or she doesn't knows XML, sorry, SQL files. He never wrote any SQL query, the structured query language. Select, insert, update it. That guy never wrote any kind of stuff. But that guy is good in object-oriented programming. That guy have worked in Java very well. So they said, okay, we will provide this ORM so that even a guy who doesn't know how to write any SQL query can work in this project. So they deduce that we will use a class, this class, then entity class, and we will use this entity class to map in database through this framework Hibernate. And whatever class we use here, that become, I mean, the class name becomes the table name, and column name becomes column. For field name becomes column name. Anyone say something? There's a disturbance coming up. Farah, can you please mute yourself? Okay. So yeah. So that's the reason we are using Hibernate. So it's one of the framework which really works well with database. So we don't have to focus on database. We can work on our logic stuffs or business logic. The actual reason why we are working any project. Okay, so the very first step was adding these libraries. So I already explained you how and where to pick these things. So first place is you can use Maven repository, a global repository where you can find all these dependencies. It's one of the huge repository and you can find, I believe, every single library you can think of, it's present there. Okay, so we have used Hibernate because we are learning Hibernate. Second, Hibernate works with database. So you have to decide which database we are going to use. So I picked MySQL. This is one of the simplest database out there with a simple syntax, and you don't have to put lots of energy to install and write queries. So we pick MySQL, and bottom two libraries are for XML processing. Otherwise, your XML file, this POM XML file and that Hibernate configuration XML file won't be able to execute or not be able to parsed by the Hibernate framework. Okay, so we just needed only four libraries for basic stuff. So step one is to add libraries. That is done. Second, you have to add this configuration file. So we already did that. Let's see what we actually have in this project or this in this file. Okay, so it's an XML file, so it must have some document or the header about the or the information about the file. That's here. Okay, cool. Next, we have this root tag, hibernate hyphen configuration. Again, these are predefined tags. You cannot change them. It is understood by the Hibernate framework. So you cannot change these tags. These are predefined tags. Okay. Inside that, there's a sub tag, SessionFactory. Okay. Again, this is predefined. You cannot change it. And further, we have multiple nested tags. Starts with property. So these are property tags, and they have their own purpose. If you notice here, so start with the first four line are, I think if you guys have done with JDBC API, so you can clearly understand what's happening here after reading the contents of these tags. So property tag has some name, and again these names are constant. These are fixed. You have to use it as it is. You cannot change it. You have to write it as it is. So first is driver class, which is your MySQL or any database driver. We are using MySQL, so I have to give MySQL driver name, and that's the driver name. Com, MySQL, CJ, JDBC. This highlighted section is package name. Driver is my class name. How do I know? Because I am a Java developer and Java works that way. It keeps package name in small and class name capital. So if you knows this basic rule, you can easily deduce that this is a combination of a class name and package name. We call this fully qualified class name. Okay, this driver name, then is the URL. We already understood what is this URL. So here we give the IP of the project. Right now it's localhost, so you can also write the domain name, that is localhost, then the port of MySQL, and then 2025 dash gen dash batch or hyphen gen hyphen batch is the database name. And these are certain things which you can just write as it is. Even if you remove it, sometimes you will get some configuration issues. So that's why I wrote public key retrieval. It is required by Hibernate when it is connecting with um, database. So we needed this configuration. So it's like a key value. So question mark and then allow public key retrieval true. This is part of a configuration and you have to provide it sometimes, and as we progress, so maybe we need to add some more configuration if required. Then username and password, that's your database username and password, and write it accordingly. In your system maybe it's different. So this is the database configuration part. And you guys can notice initially when we were doing in core Java and in servlet, we wrote this kind of code in Java file, which is not good because it's an option. Definitely you can have all these piece of configuration in Java file, but again if it is a configuration file, so we should put it somewhere outside in our packages. So Java classes can read it through dynamically. So it's like a globally accessible, and this is a neat and clean way to put any configuration outside of the packages. So for that we have this XML file for Hibernate configuration. Okay, this is done, and we have externalized the JDBC API or database configuration part. Next, this property name dialect, and it tells us that which database we are using. So far, it is not making any sense to Hibernate because Hibernate says I can convert your Java class into a table. That's great. Yeah, looks good that your class gets converted into a table and you don't have to do much, at least for besides the configuration part. But once your configuration is ready, you have to write just 2 3 lines maybe max, and then your class can be converted into a table. But how does Hibernate knows that you are using MySQL? You have to tell it. So at first place is the very first place where you can tell it in your POM file that hey, I am using this library. But that's the half information, that we are using MySQL, but maybe uh, you might add one more library. It is possible, guys. In a single Hibernate application, you can have multiple databases as well. It is possible, and I have worked in one of the project where we have like two databases, one for logging purpose and for auditing purpose, and other data was for other database for all the basic purpose like the actual project needs that. So all the logic goes there, and for logging and auditing purpose, we were using a different database. So that we also configured, but it was a Spring Boot application with Hibernate. So that's where we did that. So it is possible that in a single POM file you might add multiple libraries. So again, it's like a confusion for the Hibernate framework, that how it knows that we have to we are actually using MySQL. So we have to tell this through this dialect. So select a SQL dialect. Through this, Hibernate detects the database we are using in project, and then Hibernate, this is important, guys, then Hibernate generates SQL query according to the database. So once it knows that dialect is MySQL, so it will generate SQL queries accordingly. Okay, so it knows that where we things are, and then it can uh, generate queries. So we will see in future, in maybe next 20 or 30 minutes, that how it generates SQL query. Fine. So this tells us, not us, but this tells Hibernate framework that we are using MySQL and you have to generate SQL query according to MySQL database. That's it. That's the purpose of dialect. I'll ask this question maybe next in 3 4 days. So I'll see how many of you guys can remember this point. Dialect is super important in even in terms of interviews. I have asked this question multiple times to other developers who joined the organization, and they most of them they failed to answer this question. Okay, so this is done. Now we know how does Hibernate knows that how to generate SQL query. What's the standard? Next is, if it is generating SQL query, so can we print it on our Eclipse console, yes, it's possible by using this property, show SQL. So it prints the SQL on our standard output, that console we are using so far. So if it successfully generates any SQL query, it will get printed on your console. That's it. This we will talk about later, and we will see this in a 5 minute. So ignore this part. We will discuss after doing some CRUD operations in Hibernate, then we'll discuss it. But I hope all these lines are clear, that what we are up to, why we needed these libraries and these lines. Again, these are minimum lines which must be there to work with Hibernate. There's no limitation. You can add as much property you can want. Properties, mapping, listeners, event, collection cache, and class cache. So multiple possibilities are there. So I'm keeping it simple so you guys can focus and understand what we have here. Okay, so this was our second file to add the configuration file. And let's move forward. So once we're done with the configuration file, next we have to focus on entity, like which Java class is going to be converted into a table. So we start with a Pojo class. Pojo class is what? This class. A class with private fields and public getter setter. So you guys can see we have a class user which has two private fields, ID and name, and we have created public getters and setters, and that's how we create a simple Pojo class. It stands for plain old Java object, and this is a typical way, and you will find these kind of classes all over your project. This is a standard practice. And why we use these Pojo classes? To transfer data from one end to another end. So if you want to transfer your data from one end to another end, you need an object, and this object needs to be initialized. So we initialize that object, fill the data, and send it over to next file or service. I'll give you example what I mean here if you guys confuse. So in future we will talk about MVC design pattern. Okay, if you know, that's good. I'm just giving a high level picture. So there we will create three different layers or packages. Okay, so the first package would be, a first layer would be controller. Second would be service, and let's say next would be repository. Okay, so these are three different layers or services which we will create later in Spring Boot. And if I have to send data from here to here, let's suppose I want to save user. Now think about, if you have to save user, so while saving you must be providing some data like ID, some ABC name, some XYZ address. So what I have passed, ID, name and address. Let's suppose ID, name and address. So you have to fill that data, correct? You have to fill the data so service can know that I am supposed to pass the data to repository, and repository is a layer which connects with database. So how we can proceed with this data? Just give me a minute, let me focus, put this out. I'm explaining how Pojo class can be used. Okay, so this is our data. So what I'll do, I'll create a class user u equals new user, and then I can set u dot set id is equal to 1 u dot set name, it will have ABC. Then I can say u dot set, let's say, address, and then I'll pass XYZ. Then we will have this set as well. So set ID, name and address. This is what I'm doing. So what is user? It's a simple Pojo class which is transferring your data from controller to service layer. I'm just giving an example. There are multiple ways. So just giving a rough idea how you can use a Pojo class, and we will use it accordingly. So now this data will get passed to service layer. Now it has all that data, and further this repository is connected with one database. Okay, you will see this repository is connected with one database. What is database? This is our database. Let's say MySQL. So you have to transfer the data. So you have to use the Pojo classes. So this will have all the data we have, and it goes from where I paste it down. Should be up here, then it goes here, and finally this goes as a in a table. So instead of this, it looks like in a table structure. So it goes like ID, name, address. So ID is 1. Come on. Then name is ABC and address is XYZ. So as a result, this will happen. Not exactly this will happen. I just gave you an idea how your Pojo class can be beneficial when you're using it properly. So this is a rough picture of using any Pojo class. So by using Pojo class, we can transfer data from one to other layer. Layer means packages. Okay, short writing package. PKG. Okay, so I hope this makes sense why we are using Pojo classes. Okay, so we have Pojo class, but problem is Hibernate doesn't understand this Pojo part. It says, okay, if you want to transfer data, you have to convert that Pojo class into an entity class. And how to make it an entity class? Just use this annotation at entity. Make sure that you are importing this annotation from persistence API, Java x.persistence, and that's why JPA is important. I gave it as a homework to try this out from your end. That what is JPA? It stands for Java Persistence API, and it has a great role in saving data like this way. Hibernate, Ibatis, Eclipse Link. There are multiple ORM tools out there, and all these tools actually uses JPA conventions. So when we talk about, let me get this image. So we are talking about JPA. So treat this JPA as an interface. It's an interface, let's suppose. Okay, and then we have classes. So for that you can treat, we have one Hibernate. There's one more framework, ORM tool, that is Ibatis. There's one more framework, Eclipse Link. So all these are ORM tools. So what they do, think about interface. What does interface do? It gives you an specification, a general way that this has to be done. But does it provide implementation? No, it doesn't. So what does it do? It gives you a rule that this has to be done. Save object. But how to save object? It's totally up to the class. So you can treat these frameworks as a class, that these are classes which is implementing. I should wrap this in. It's not actually true. I'm just giving you an idea that how you can think of. It's not actual, just for your understanding, guys, that you can treat JPA as an interface, and the ORM, the actual things, these are as a classes. So you can clear it out that okay, so class is just implementing all the stuffs coming from the interface. It doesn't provide any rule, it just implements what is specified by the interface. Treat this as a class, and as a class. So that's how a JPA can be simplified. Right? It acts as an interface which gives specification and all the possible ORMs. They can be known as, oh sorry, I shouldn't write class here. It should be here. These are ORM tools. All three are ORM tools. ORM. Okay, so Hibernate says, okay, I don't understand Pojo class. You have to give me a entity class. And how to make it entity class? Just use this at entity annotation at top of the class, the Pojo class, and start. What else we did? Step 4. Okay, and step 4 was creating a utility class to get a DB connection. Again, this is not correct. This is not exactly we get database connection. Just to simplify this class working, I said when you use this class, so it will give us a database connection. So this code is quite complex, so I'll talk about this class later. Maybe after two classes, we can come through this. We can go through this class because this is a one-time process, and we are done till fourth step. Now we will see the next step. Actually, in third step, we did this part. I can take that thing from here. So in step 3, I'll take this out from here. Okay. So in step 3, we can do one more thing. Once we're done step 3, one portion is left. Whatever class you have done, this is like a half configuration. Creating an entity class is fine, but you have to register that entity class in your configuration file as well, in Hibernate configuration file. So once your entity class is ready, so what you have to do, even this class is not even complete. When you create this class, make sure that you are passing one annotation at top of your ID, the primary key. Hibernate says if you are going for an entity class, that please provide the primary key. It is mandatory to work in Hibernate. Hibernate always requires a primary key. Without it, it won't create the table. If you don't get, it will give you an exception that ID is missing, that entity is missing. Entity is missing the primary key. So you have to give two annotation. At least two annotations are required to convert a Pojo class into an entity class. So at entity, and you have to pass this at ID for primary key, and make sure the field. If I have to convert this class into to an entity class, at entity is written at top of it. Likewise, I have to convert this ID, this field ID as a primary key, so I have to write this at ID on top of it. So Hibernate knows that entity is for class user, at ID is for int ID. That's how annotation works. You have to write these annotation at top of your fields and classes. Okay, so as I said, this is half part of creation of entity class. You have to register that as well. So what you have to do, you have to register this class like this way. So in configuration file, make sure this line is also there, mapping. So this was left when I was explaining configuration file. So you have to give this mapping as well. So your entity class setup is done. So step 3 is done. Okay, fine. And let's continue from the same point. So we have third step ready. Fourth contains the code, the actual uh, connection code. So we can take this class again. Okay, I'll take this whole code like this. So we'll discuss about the code later after writing some examples, then we can get back to this example. But for now, let's suppose this step is required and you have to write it only once, and then it can be reused multiple times. So we can say step 4. Step 4 is there because this is one critical part. So we can do that later, but this has to be there. Okay, so we are done with the step 4. What's the next step? Next step 5, which is actual implementation. So now we have to test this whole thing. Yeah, we are now at the last stage where we can test this and convert this whole class into a table by using Hibernate. So let me create one package inside src main java. So right click on src main java, new package, and write org dot hibernate dot, and let me create one package tester. I tend to create these packages and classes, so it ends with tester. So I know I'm going to write main method inside it. That's right, because we don't have any other luxury to execute our application. We don't have an API, we don't have any web application, so you cannot trigger your the whole flow to test your code. We are just here with Hibernate, and to test anything, the only thing left in Java is main method. So that's right, for every single testing we have to write multiple main method. The tester is here. Let's create new class. It's going to be user, so I'll say user tester. Done. And main method. Okay, till now everything is simple, looks good. Now here comes one critical part. Okay, so in steps 5, uh, we have to write some steps, some code, or one more steps. You can say nested steps. In step 5, we have some nested steps. What these steps will do? We have to read the configuration XML file and get session factory object. Okay. Okay. So this we have to do. In next step, from session factory, we will get session object. Okay. Why we need this thing? The whole thing is why we are doing all this stuffs, so we can start a transaction. And from session object, we have to start a transaction. And this is important. Without any transaction, not a single database works, especially RDBMS. RDBMS means all database which supports tables like Oracle, MySQL, Postgre, MariaDB. Lots of databases are there which supports tables. I'm not talking about SQL, I'm talking about SQL tables, SQL data, not NoSQL databases. So if we are talking about this transaction, so it needs transaction, otherwise it cannot perform the required operation. Think about, even if I have to create table manually in this database. Right now it's empty. If I refresh or reload, I can see all these things are empty, and particularly we have to work on tables. So it's a empty table. Even if I have to create a table, I have to right click, then create table, then it will give me a space. I'll write some name, then add some columns, then it will take some ID, then some more columns, then some type, and then I can click and this thing happens. So by default, MySQL server, yes, MySQL is running a server. How to configure, verify it? We are inside this schemas section or schemas tab. If you switch to administration tab, there's option you can see server status. And here you can see, yeah, it is running. Everything is there, right? So we can verify all these server states from here, and we can see server is running, and server needs a transaction. Without it cannot work. So to start the transaction from Hibernate, we have to write these steps 1, 2, 3. So let's do this. So in step 5, which is actually a testing file, step 4 is actually execute, or not execute, let's test the application. Okay, so step 1 says read the XML file. So it is pretty simple. If you have everything done, so these steps will be simple, and these are going to be repetitive. So I believe by the end of the Hibernate, you guys will be comfortable with these steps. You have to write this again and again multiple times. So I'm going to write it again in multiple main methods. So first step is, it says read the configuration file and get the session factory object. Why it says session factory object? If you guys have noticed, in configuration XML file, the root tag was session factory for all these properties. Forget about the root tag, this one, the sub root tag you can say. For these properties, the root tag is session factory, and this session factory is holding up all these information. That's correct, and that's how XML works. And for this, you have to have a basic understanding of XML. So for all these property tag, session factory acts as a root tag. So I need to get this session factory first, then I can read the properties. Good thing is I don't have to read these manually. It is understood by the Hibernate. So let's do this. So first step is this, and to do all this part, we have our class ready. This class, Hibernate utils. That's right, guys. We are going to use this class, which gives that, an access. So it says we have created one method inside this Hibernate utils, get session factory, and it returns session factory. How? I don't know yet, but yeah, it gives us session factory object. So here I'll say get session factory object, and then I can create object of session factory and always pick from classes, and interface should be from Hibernate package, annotation always from JPA. Again repeating, classes interface from Hibernate package only or Hibernate library, and annotation from JPA. Okay, so we imported from Hibernate, and I'll call this factory, or session factory is better. So we are done with the first step. We read the XML file and got the session factory. Good thing is we don't have to do that everything manually because we are using a framework. That's the luxury to have the frameworks. You don't have to do lots of things by yourself. You just need to know the steps. Okay, second step says from session factory we will get session object. That's fine. So we'll say session factory, then it says open session, and it will give me session. Again import from, we can see multiple things are there, so not from MySQL, not no, from Hibernate. So here we are, session done. Always format your code format done. Okay, now we have the session, and ultimately what we get from this session, the transaction. We have to start a transaction. I'll replace, we start with begin, so it can be connect with the method because we have a method with begin. So I'll say session dot begin transaction. Done. So the very first step is, or you can say first section is done. We have to begin the transaction. To begin the transaction, we have to read the XML file to get the session factory, and session factory has all the information like all the database configuration and plus some Hibernate level configuration. From there we get the session, and from session we get the transaction. It is mandatory and you have to do this if you are working in a stand-alone application. Right now we are not getting any support from web or any of the big frameworks, so Hibernate is alone here, and that's how you create instance. Okay, in next step that will be do later, fourth, in step 5 we just have to close all the open connection, and even before that make sure that everything is up to the mark. You have to do what we call that flush, like whatever flush. Why we are using flush method? Because we are here connecting server from one server. So it might happen that while doing this network call, something might not reach to the endpoint or the sink. So if this happens, so you will see inconsistency in your code. So every time you execute at database level, make sure that you are flushing everything till the end, because we have two network. One is core Java running, then we have Hibernate, and now we have MySQL server running. We have a server running, so Hibernate interacts with the server in, and that's the network also. Sometimes it's possible that not everything reaches by the time and it might get stuck somewhere, so you have to flush every time when you deal with the database operation. So you have to flush this step. And last step in this list is step 6 is close all the open connection. So we don't need to close transaction, but we have to close session and session factory. So the way we have opened, we have to close it in the same sequence. So session is open in middle or inside, so you have to close it first, the session dot close, and then session factory dot close. Okay, so that means step 1 to 3 is important to get the transaction, and then step 5 6 are required to flush the content or the operation we perform on database. So these three lines and bottom three lines, they will be always there. They will be act as a skeleton. We have to write this code again and again. The only thing which keeps changing, the step 4. Here again I'm going back to the same point, why we are learning Hibernate. So our class can get mapped in database without doing any effort. We won't touch database and write anything manually at least, and everything will be handled by the Hibernate. So you just have to focus on your business logic, the actual requirement why you are working in a project. That's the whole purpose of working in Hibernate. So you guys can focus on the actual stuffs. Don't save this extra table. Okay, so our table is still empty. So idea was to map the user table or users or user class into as a or as a table, into database as a table. So what you have to do, you have to create instance user, import that from entity package, then user, then equal, then user. Okay, created object. Then I have to initialize certain fields. or yeah, okay, let's do that. So set id, let's say 1, then user dot set name, let's say j. Okay, now what you have to do, we have to call one function which I didn't mention, which goes in step 4. So what we're up to, we have to save this content in database. So again, session will help. Session says that I can help you with a method which says save. So if you want to persist, or if you want to save this data in database, you have to call me and pass that object here. This is something similar what we saw here. So you have this object user u and something which goes in database and converts back into a table. So you can imagine that's what I'm going to do. So user has all these ID name and structures, and when it reaches to table, Hibernate is in the middle. I can write here. Hibernate is here. That ORM. It converts that class into a table. Okay. So let's try this out and see if yeah, that's it, guys. That much you have to do in first time. At first level, you have to do this because it's a first time setup. So that takes effort. After that, it will be easy. So right click, it's a main method, so you can just execute it like a normal main method. So right click, run as Java application, and okay, file is not saved. So okay, this is the console, and now check out the console. We make sure that everything gets printed on console. How we make sure? Property name show SQL true, and that's the reason I can see two SQL queries. You guys can see I haven't wrote this queries. Create table user, and it also mentioned which column is what, and then it also inserts one record. Insert into user name, ID, and values here. Okay, cool. Now let's check database. So this is our database. Right click and refresh, and here we can see marking is there. And if I expand, we have a user table. Right click on it, select rows, and yes, I can see I haven't created this table, I haven't inserted it, but Hibernate did that just because we called that save method. So when we call save method, it insert record into the table, and because we give at entity at top of the class, so it knows this class is going to be mapped as a table in database, so it creates the table. So it starts with creation of table and then goes with this insert record. This is what it says on console side. So we are done with our very first example of Hibernate where we are able to execute or save the record. Okay, save this image first and test file. Let me copy this. Okay. Okay, goes black. Fine. So this is our example, which is actually triggering that whole part. Fine, and this is our output. And that's how our database looks like. So critical thing is here, you have to make sure that you are doing all these steps. I can remove this line from this part, not required. So first 3 lines, these are part of Hibernate. Last 3 lines, which is also part of Hibernate, and in between we are doing the business logic, the actual requirement, because idea was to create a user and insert one record. So this goes as a normal code or a code level, and this is our actual part. Fine, so our example is ready. Now what else we can do? Let's create some more records inside the table. So how to do that? So if I have to create one more entry in database level, in database, so I have to create one more object. So I can create one more user dot not dot. Let's create one new user. User equals user. Well, let's create a new file because this will confuse you guys. So let's create a new file for the testing. Everything remains same. I'm going to create or insert some more records. That's the idea. So I'll copy this, paste it as it is. We are using user tester 2, and here I'll say user 1. So we already know we have ID 1, so I'll say this. Okay, that's one user, and then I'll say user 2. If it is user 1, this also goes 1, this also goes 1. If this is 2, this also becomes 2, this also becomes 2. Okay, ID 3, and let's say Sam. 2 users. Now if you are creating 2 objects or 2 users, so you have to call save method 2 times. First for this user 1 and second for user 2. So session.save user 1 goes here and this one goes save 2. That's it. So if you have 10 objects, that means you have to call save method 10 times. So it's our beginning class. So yeah, bear with that. That's how we have to work. Okay, and then simple way, right click, run as your application. And yeah, I can see 2 insert queries this time. Insert user, insert user. Great. Let's have a look on database. If I refresh, yep, I can see 2 more records are inserted in database. Okay, so that's how save method works. Okay, now next what we can do, let's say I have some other fields like uh, like a string type. Okay, we have already string type here. We can add some more fields here or new classes. So let me clear that mapping first, then we can move forward. Let's put this in box. Okay, so we just created a user class this way, user, then user has ID, fine, user has name, or let's say the object. We are starting a new topic here where we can do with deal with collections. So the topic is collections in Hibernate. So let's suppose we have a student class. Okay, student has ID, name, and then let's say subject. But definitely subject will be multiple. So ID would be of int type. That's fine. And we have to keep integer as an ID or any long type as a, but there should be a numeric at least. Name would be of string type, fine. But subject could be multiple. I'm expecting at least 5-6 subjects per student. So that will be the case. I cannot say int or string. Hibernate needs to understand that we are giving some collection or list. So let's say I'm going to say list of string. Okay. So let's try to save this object and see how it works. I'm going to create a new object this time. So going to Eclipse again. Let's close these files. Okay, so idea is close this box. Idea is to create a new entity class, a student class. So right click, new, and I'll pick a class. I'll say student, done, and then student will have 3 fields: private int ID, private string name, and then next field is private list. We already did the collection, so we know what is list here, and then we can say list of string, and it's going to be subjects, not just subjects, subjects. If I wrote subject there, so I need to correct that. It's subjects. Okay, so we need to import this class as well from util package. Okay, it's here. So collection framework is present inside this util framework or util package. Not framework, util package. Okay, this is ready. Next, we have to create its getter setters. And which is required. It is required? Because we get to know if you have to pass data from this place to another place, you have to set this field, and you have to set how to set them through setters. And you can create it by yourself, or you can generate it through Eclipse. So right click on any empty space inside the file, not here, not this section, right section. Right click, place your cursor where you want to generate. Right click, source, getter setters. Either you can check this manually, or you can this button select all. So ID, name, subjects gets highlighted and generate. So now we have a simple project class, nothing special about it. Now I have to convert this into an entity class. So at entity, I have to write at the top of the class. And because we also get to know that if you are working with Hibernate, it also needed ID. Without it, it will not create table. It needs a primary key. Primary key is a penetratory thing. You have to give it, otherwise it will give an error. Fine. Now this is half part. We have to register this newly created entity in configuration file. So here we are in configuration file. We have to create one more mapping tag, mapping class, and give the fully qualified name. So org dot hp dot entity dot student. How to cross check? You have given the correct path. Hold the control button, hold control and hover the mouse. It becomes hyperlink. It's not becoming because I have given wrong. Now if I cross check again, hold control and hover, yeah, it becomes hyperlink. See, when you click, it goes there. Okay, so mapping is done. Your entity class is ready. Now let's create a tester file, the same tester. So it was user tester. Now we are going to create employee tester. So class employee tester. Okay, so it's going to be main method. So we already gone through the code. So let me write that quickly without explaining much. So start with hibernate utils dot get me the session factory. It gives me session factory. Then once we have session factory, so you can obtain session factory dot open session, and session from Hibernate, session done. And once you have session, you can start a transaction. So begin dot begin transaction. Done. So we are done with the basic part, which says you have to create a structure of your Hibernate application. So first half is ready for that structure level. Next, we have to make sure that we are flushing all the contents to server, that MySQL server, and plus we are keeping or like we are not keeping this connection open, and we have to close them. So it goes like session dot flush, session dot close, then session factory dot close. Okay, this is done. Now finally we have to deal with that object student object we have to create. Then new student dot set id, let's say 1, student, whoa, student dot set, what was that, name, let's say 1. Okay, so I'm going to, let's say, write Ram. And now the third field says give me the what do you call that, subject. So set subject, but it's a list, so I don't have that list yet. Need to create that. So let's do that above, and then we initialize it. So I'll say I'm going to create a list of string. String, I'll call this subjects equals new array list, and then subjects dot add. That's how we add things inside. So I'll say uh, core Java. Then let's add three more tables. Sorry, subjects. Hibernate. Let's say Spring Boot. Okay, so we have subjects ready. Now we have to initialize this field. So I can remove null and pass that collection reference. Oh, it is typing two times. Subjects. Set subject. Subject done. Okay, fine. So our object is ready. Last step is I need to save this object. So it takes session dot save and subjects. Sorry, not subjects, student. Okay. Well, by the way, guys, this code won't work. Let's see what exception we'll get. So right click, run as application, and we're getting an error. Let's see. Copy this line, go back to this part and paste it. Let me zoom it for you guys so you can read it. So it says could not determine the type for list at table student for column subjects. So it failed to understand the collection we gave inside this collection, the object. You can see when we give int, it was perfect for the Hibernate. It deals it and it creates a field. When we give string, it also understands that. But as soon as we give list of string, it fails to understand. It clearly says it doesn't understand the type of it, list. So we have to tell this explicitly to the Hibernate that, hey, I'm using a collection type. So how to do that? You have to use one more annotation. So guys, Hibernate is all about annotation. In future, we are going to learn lots of annotation from different frameworks, from different libraries. So now onwards, lots of annotation you have to learn and see. And so just practice, only then you can remember. So the annotation you have to type at top of it, like we read, like we wrote ID on top of ID, we wrote entity at top of class name. So we have to tell this to the Hibernate. So we have to write annotation here. So write here collection elements, collection element collection, I mean, yeah, this annotation you have to use. So it tells Hibernate that this is not an ordinary field, it's actually a collection of something. So it will be taken care by the Hibernate accordingly. Okay, so let's go back to tester. Now it should work if we are not getting any unexpected error. So here, execute it, and yeah, it's working. Now notice carefully, this time it's not creating only one table, it has created two tables. One is for student and one for student subjects. Some alter command is also executed and 4 insert queries. Think about it, you have to do this by yourself. So Hibernate will help us to write or remove all these kind of repetitive stuffs. Yeah, at some moment you have to write these codes by yourself, code or SQL queries, but because we have a ORM framework, so this helps us to remove all these extra stuffs. So we can focus on business logic. We can write on the code, not writing tables and then maintaining it. It can be taken care by the Hibernate itself. Okay, so these are the queries triggered by Hibernate. Cool. Let's have a look on database. So if I right now it's not there, I have to refresh it. So right click and refresh all. I can see two tables are there. Let's check the student first. So it's ID1, name Ram. Okay, cool. So we have student record. If I have to get the subjects, so right click on subject and select, and here you can see student ID is maintained and list of subjects are here. So that's how it beautifully manages things. You cannot put all these records in one table because IDs, the primary ID cannot be repetitive. I don't know guys you have done or not. I have asked you guys to go through the keys. If you haven't, let me write this again in Hibernate for your homework part, that you have to go through all the keys in Hibernate. Okay, check this out how it works. It is important. Primary key, foreign key, composite key, unique key. lots of keys are there. So just type this in Google, keys in database. But not in Hibernate. It is about database. I will just use it database. Okay, check this out and let's see how much information you guys can gather. Okay, so that's how Hibernate works. So give me a moment. Let me put this whole thing on Paint. Copy. It goes here. So we have a table structure. That's the first table. Next table is, let me take subject here, and it also keeps the ID here. So if you have to fetch subject of particular user, you know ID one is matched with name, and then same ID is used here. So it can be easily configured. Okay, so first table was student, that's here. Other table was student subjects. So it creates table by itself just by referring the field name. So this student is actually a database name. Oh, sorry, a table name. Student is your table name, and underscore it adds. And what is subjects here? Subject is actually coming from the variable name, guys. If you have noticed, we give the field name subjects. So it picks the collection reference and use it as a part of your table name. So if I have to explain, oh, why is this highlighting the subjects? Okay. So this I can use as a reference. So this is your field name, and that's the class name. So it combines these two things together and generates a table name. That's how Hibernate works. So in future we will see lots of this kind of combination, and then we will get to know some more information about Hibernate. Okay, and to work all that you have to write a code. So this is our code. Okay, let me put it 12th, it's fine, and black. The key thing, so if you have to save collections in Hibernate, you have to make sure that you are using element collection annotation. So now we are using 3 annotation, but again this is not mandatory. It depends upon what type of fields you are using in your code. Okay guys, so that's it for today. So just practice this much, and whatever is left, try to cover up in your weekends. And when we meet, we will add some more Hibernate code. And I'll suggest one more part when you guys are away. If you are already, it's for only two guys, Sushil and this new lady Snigdha. Otherwise, Sabina, Farah, and Vamsi, you guys can continue once you're done with this whole part. If it is done, by the way, it's for everyone. If you want, you can uh,
Sure, Pankaj. Yep.
do this Hibernate. Uh, what do you call that? Mapping. Okay, check this out. What is Hibernate mapping? This is important, and we will do this in next class. So I don't know, might be you in maybe somewhere in your graduation or post graduation or somewhere you must have heard these mappings: one to one, one to many, many to one. If not, that's fine, we will learn it. And come on, many to many. So these are four mappings we have to understand and how Hibernate deals with it, because that's where we will see how Hibernate support has a relationship in Java. So this is our next target, but I'll suggest at least have a try and check out how Hibernate works it. And plus, this is advanced part. Even before that, we have to do CRUD operations, CRUD, right? We have done that in JDBC API. We have done that in servlets. We are going to do this again in Hibernate. So this is your assignment. I think not here. This is the future, what I'm going to teach you. And here. Second homework is check out CRUD operations in Hibernate. We have already done insert using save method. Yes, every time we save record, what we called save method in tester file. You use the save. So this is actually doing what? It is triggering insert query. So likewise, there are other methods Just figure them out and check how to perform these CRUD operations. I'll definitely teach you, but before that, on Monday, for sure, be ready with the system so I can see you guys are actually practicing. And yeah, you have to Google it, search it out on a web, or ChatGPT, or your reference or website, whatever works for you, or any YouTube video. But check out how to write CRUD operations. Try your best to figure this out question for me.